But there's also a reality check that the industry we're in, HR, plays
Hmm.
an outside role in how things happen because work is 80-90% of most people's lives. And as much as we
Yeah.
don't want it to be, right? When you think about the actions taken just over this last weekend and the impact that is being had in our country around federal agents who have been hired, there is a leadership culture that's been set, but in that leadership culture conversation, there is also a series of policies. There are hiring and recruiting policies. There are decisions about training. There are decisions about incentives that are being given. And every time you sort of think about how things come about, how do they happen inside of both organizations and in our cultures, we have to go back to you might say, well, that's just words.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome everyone to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We are recording today on January 28th, 2026. Got to remember that we've hit 2026 already. And we're going to bring you all the news you can use this week. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, a Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research advisory firm if you haven't worked with us previously. And joining me today, as usual, is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Welcome to the show. It's been a lot, right? Like we've both been traveling, but there's also been a lot of heavy in the United States over the last couple of days. So we're recording today. People will get this next week. It's been a long week on both an emotional level, but also I think you getting back from your travels. We've had a lot of work going on, so we're gonna have we'll try and keep it as light as
We
we
can.
can, but still talk about the important and necessary things today, right, Cliff?
Yeah, I think that's a good mission statement for us. That's
Yeah,
another term that's going to come up.
yeah.
But I think we should start as we always do, or at least as we've done the last few months, just mentioning that our report is out, the 28th annual. It's become now that we're about to start the 29th. So I'm like, wait,
Survey,
which
yeah,
one? Which is
I
crazy,
know.
right? Our survey is old enough to rent a car now. I think.
Yeah, yes, I know. Yeah, it's really because I've got kids now who are over 30, and I'm like, ooh, my report's going to be over 30. My kid's over 30. How old does that make me? But again, for our Gen
35.
Zs out there, we change every year. It's really cool,
Yeah,
honestly.
exactly. But yeah, it's a mass report if you haven't seen it. It's over 10,000 participants, over 4,600 individual organizations giving their insights to us. I probably say it every time, but it's so fresh in my mind of how thankful we are for anyone that takes it to give us this data. And it's really amazing. But all of that can be purchased on our website. And we've also broken it down in each of the segment areas because it is 380 pages. We understand that's a lot, even though I still keep talking to people who've read the whole thing, and I'm thank you, but you don't have to. You can just stick with what you have. But we'll get the 29th annual getting in the way, as I mentioned, or coming up. That's going to be launching on April 15th.
April 15th, Tammy is going to be launching for our distributor. So if you are in the distributor process, please make sure you let us know as quickly as possible so we can get you part of the process. Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. We mentioned the survey at the top of the show. We talk about sort of how long we've been doing it, but the question that always comes to me is like, so how do I use it? I had that
Mm.
conversation this week from Ruth House, who works over at one of the organizations I just did a podcast for, and it was a good question. I said, well, I said everybody kind of uses it in their own way because it is so big, right? But I think the big one for if you're a practitioner is if you are building out an HR system strategy, it has all the starting points for that conversation, right? And then if you are a vendor or you are a organization looking to sort of update sort of your approach to the market, it has a lot of market analysis information in it. And then if you're someone getting ready to buy a technology, it's a great place to start your conversation. We were just having this discussion that selection tools are kind of there's a lot of them out there in the market right now. You can get a lot of them sort of like to walk you through selecting. What they don't always tell you is kind of how the vendors meet the level of complexity for the kind of organizations they work with. And that's a lot of what ours does it is that voice the customer complexity conversation. Do they hit what we need from a user experience? Do they hit what we need from a vendor satisfaction? So yeah, it's kind of fun to kind of think about how it gets used in multiple different ways, but it is not fun to think about how old I am. I hear sometimes that I have been sort of thinking about this conversation, but I love it. It never. The other day I was talking with someone, I was like, yeah, it's a passion. You kind of have to be passionate about it when you're doing this kind of work, right? Yeah.
And there's always new things going on. Speaking of, the conversation starting, we've got all sorts of mergers and acquisitions. I think it was maybe the show before where it was a little slow, right? Because it was right around the end of the calendar year. But we have quite a few now, including Venture. We've mentioned them before, Venture Solutions. They are certainly no strangers to the mergers and acquisition space. And they have acquired Distro, which does AI-powered recruitment. They are definitely, Venture being one of the more acquisitive companies. I think maybe Prism HR might be one of the more well-known members of the portfolio.
Yeah.
But you can see how they're really building things out and, the full life cycle and everything that's involved. So, this is a very global looking one. Distro has in their platform now almost 2 million active candidates in 68 countries. So including, we assume, Mauritius and Indonesia, where Stacey and I just
were. Both of us were at just a few weeks ago. Yeah. It's interesting here because, Venture is truly, they've got a huge portfolio of solutions underneath their platform, right? And we're seeing more and more organizations, I think, expand sort of the idea of a private equity sort of platform-led conversation, right? The recruiting services that have an AI component to it is going to get into a couple of other stories we're going to have this week. But I do think AI recruiting assistance versus sort of a list of resumes versus sort of scraping conversations we had about like where do you get your data from, all of that's kind of up in the air in the market right now, right? But we do know that it is one of the fastest growing spaces for where organizations are, and not talking practitioner organizations, but the vendors are leveraging AI to get more efficient with the HR process and technology they're investing in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the sort of the global aspect. So that goes into this next one, which is Remote, who we mentioned I feel like just recently with Workday, and now Remote is acquiring Atlas. Atlas, if you don't know them, they are an expense management solution, but specifically designed for global teams. So expense management is becoming quite the topic. And in fact, I believe we can mention this, Stacey, that we're going to have a bit of a finance survey within a survey this year on some of these finance topics, specifically because we're hearing that, I know this is a bit of a refrain for us, but that blurring of the lines between what's HR tech and what isn't, as we sort of integrate all of these different things in the way we work. Well, expense management is a big part of that financial conversation that also is one of those areas that kind of bridges the gap between HR tech and the finance world. So you can kind of see where Remote, being very globally focused, would want to acquire that type of company.
Yeah, and we should note that Remote has been growing rapidly. We're working on getting another briefing with them. We have a good friend who recently just went over there on the AR side, right? Ryan Lee, who we've known through his time at Vizier, his time at Greenhouse, his time at a couple other places. Always good when we have people we know who are analyst relations who kind of move into different roles and know us from our previous background. But what I think is interesting about this is Remote has been a growing sort of payroll solution. It's the best way to kind of talk about it. It's a payroll solution, right, in the market. They were one of the big mentions when I was at Workday Rising Europe in November, that they had inked a deal to do the Workday Go global partner model. And so there was a big conversation. They had a long line at the event there at Workday. I've heard a couple other organizations that are partnering with Remote. We are hearing them more often in some conversations. So I think we're going to see more from them. We'll get some more data on that. But that sort of mix of payroll services with payroll tech with sort of, that's been around for a long time, but I do think these lines are blurring a lot more right now, and we're going to hear a lot more about organizations who kind of do a mix of these things, right?
Absolutely. And continuing on the acquisition space, Dayforce has acquired Agent Noon. Agent Noon does strategic workforce planning, and that is now already been integrated within Dayforce's platform. So you'll see this just as part of the Dayforce platform is what I'm saying, rather than a sort of separate area. So again, this is something we've seen from a few different companies, especially in sort of Dayforce's competitive space, right? Of expanding their capabilities to get into workforce planning. We've also seen some workforce planning companies expand their capabilities into HR.
HR. Yep, very much so. Yeah, I got a chance to get a preview of this Agent Noon before the full integration when I was at the Dayforce event where I spoke to the leadership group and at their analyst event, and I really liked this, and again, I thought it's a very clean kind of org charty kind of workforce planning conversation. What's nice is you can kind of set up a model and roll it out and kind of see what it could look like before you apply it to the actual org, which is that sort of effective dating conversation that has to happen with workforce planning with any kind of org chart tool. We've seen a couple of other solutions like this in the market for quite some time. Agent Noon is a bit of a newer one. I think what we're seeing, there's a lot of AI in these conversations, particularly with workforce planning, because what we see is that workforce planning is somewhat the ultimate goal when you think about what AI can do for the HR space, when you go more strategic and less optimization and efficiency. And particularly that individualized workforce planning, the idea that you're not just taking a number and a role, but you're taking skills and capabilities in an individual person who's in the organization and mapping out the possibilities for them along with the bigger picture for the whole organization. That's a lot of it I think the market is hoping to be able to leverage AI for, because it could just do so much more at such a faster pace to kind of basically hold on to these general scenarios. We launched in November of last year a paper on workforce planning with Anaplan, which is one of the finance organizations who does finance planning, who is moving into the HR planning space. And the big conversation there was similar to this in the sense that how many scenarios can you run? How big of a data set they really invested heavily in a sort of an AI scenario and modeling. And that really is you could maybe do 2 or 3 in a lot of these technologies to be able to do multiple levels of modeling for all the different possibilities of what the future would look like. That is the real future of HR, is thinking about that kind of capability. So I'm excited to see this. I think this is a really good move for Dayforce. I'm interested to see if this shows up in the survey yet this year, right? So,
yeah, that will be interesting.
We do ask about specific workforce planning tools. Do they know? And we don't get a lot of them right now, right?
Yeah. And I also like, what's interesting, and it kind of ties into this next one too, is that it's a real focus towards workforce outcomes, business outcomes, right? So the one I'm referring to is Docebo, who's acquired 365 Talents. 365 Talents is a skills intelligence platform out of Lyon, France. But what's interesting is they're being very specific about this. The CEO of Docebo, Alessio Artufo, mentioned that they see skills as inputs, with the real goal being, you take skills, you take learning, and you do all this to increase capabilities and improve business outcomes, right? That's something we're very familiar with our research, is tying everything to these business outcomes. So it's a deliberate look of, it's interesting and it's cool that we've got these sort of AI-driven tools that can help infer skills and manage skills, but it's only as good as the way it helps companies actually perform better.
Yeah, I think the exact Alessio Artufo said, who's the CEO at Docebo, and I don't know if I've said that name correctly.
Sorry, Alessio.
Yeah, exactly. But the exact quote he has is, in today's economy, skills only matter if they can be used. And that is a real reality check on the fact that skills management is only valuable if you can take that and leverage it to make decisions inside the organization, right? That's the use part. I will say this is sort of a direct, I think, reaction or answer to what we're seeing over, which is probably the biggest competitor in the market, because they really are the 2 largest LMSs still in the if you kind of take out the Skillsofts and the Udemys and some of the other organizations or the big enterprise LMSs, but 2 sort of talent focused, I would say, solutions would be Docebo and Cornerstone. This is sort of a direct sort of response to, I think, the acquisition that Cornerstone made almost a year and a half ago now of Skyhive, right? Which was a talent intelligence, workforce planning, skills outcomes a big part of where they're heading with their AI strategy. I think we'll get some more details. We probably need to get a good briefing on this. I've talked to the Docebo team about us getting briefed on how they're going to integrate this 365 talent, how it's going to balance into the AI conversation, right? Because they're calling it AI-driven skills intelligence, what an agent looks like with this embedded. Conversations are coming up every day for the buyers. I know one of our clients, one of the large pharmaceuticals in France, is going through this process right now while they're sort of reassessing sort of what's going on with their big enterprise ERP conversations about their employee data. This is the conversation the really strategic HR leaders are having is AI plus skills plus my enterprise people data. How do all those things fit together, right?
Absolutely. And of course, another piece is compensation, right? What do we do with that? So that might explain some of this money raising. Compa, who we've mentioned before on the show and we know very well, they have raised $35 million in Series B to basically they're saying they're going to be using that for AI as to look into enterprise compensation. I don't think we've ever mentioned this on the show, but we always just kind of throw this stuff out. Yeah. When we just say Series A, Series B, Series C, that these are just rounds of funding, meaning that they're going out and they're looking for more funding, and they're just in alphabetical order. So yeah. I just realized that it's one of those things that we just kind of throw out, and we're trying to be better about, the educational.
Yeah. Well, Compass is a bit of a Cinderella story in our space, right? I remember when their founder came to us. They had really small, under $10 million, right? And had walked us through the side that they were going to take compensation data and put it at the front end of the recruiting cycle instead of the back end of the process, right? Which meant as you were seeing people make decisions about even joining an organization, having that compensation data that would be available as you're talking to them on a recruiting level versus once you decide you want to hire them, you kind of figure out the compensation based off of the availability you have of the levels and the management model that you have. What's interesting about this is that I think they were I want to say it's 3 years ago. It might have been 2022, maybe 2023. Our sort of emerging tech vendors that we put at the end of our presentation at HR Tech Conference. We kind of highlight vendors and solutions. We think of that grouping of people, there was, I think, one vendor who didn't make it at all, which happens when you're looking at emerging tech organizations. They end up not getting funding. Another vendor that got bought and acquired not too long after that. And then there's Compa, who just has continued to get funded. Compa also as part of the big fund run by Jason and Thomas Otter. And that, I think, is another place where you're seeing sort of HR influencers, HR people who know the market, who have been in the HR tech industry, are starting to create funds that are particularly being invested in some of these technologies. And you are seeing a lot of them really do quite well. Compa is one of them. So I think we'll see more from Compa. I'm waiting to see, does this lead to them eventually getting acquired? Do they become a larger company? Is there a full platform play here? I think that's the conversation for Compa with the amount of money they're pulling in, right?
Yeah, could very well be. So this one's kind of interesting, Stacey. You sent this one to me, and it is, rather than sort of funding or new product, it's a change instead in mission, in a mission statement. So this is from Greenhouse. This is from their CEO and co-founder, Daniel Chait, who mentioned that their founding mission had been to make every company great at hiring. And he talks about how they've gone through over 1 billion applicants, but things have changed, and there's this whole idea of AI, and there's some pushback to AI, which we've talked about before on the show. He mentioned it as the AI doom loop. As the tool, this is kind of quoting him a little bit, paraphrasing. He says, as today's AI tools get used more, hiring has gotten worse for everyone. This is the AI doom loop. So he's looking at, what do we need to do? We need to maybe change our mission. So now the Greenhouse mission is make hiring work for everyone. Now, he doesn't go into exactly what that means sort of directly in terms of how will this affect the product. But that's kind of the reason you send it along, I think, Stacey, is to say, does this matter? How does this sort of affect everything? And does this sort of founder's mission and vision play out? But I mean, that's what we're here for. This is, I would say, the epitome of spilling the tea. We're looking at this and reading the tea leaves and
reading between the lines. Yeah. No, I've known Daniel for years. I think anybody who's been in the recruiting space, I mean, he's been a bit of an inspiration, and he took Greenhouse. And I think at a point when people said, we just don't need another one of these ATSs. And he proved that there was a space for a user-friendly highly focused, sort of ATS plus, right, with a lot of candidate sort of front end to it. What I think, when you see something like this, one is it hit my mind that I just recently had a conversation with Opal Wagner. We'll talk a little bit about her. She's in a new role in a new organization, and she was saying, she found the importance of going to a founder-led business because she had come from some really great founder-led businesses in the early days of Ultimate and others, right? And how passionate that they can be, and how much that drives the environment and the culture inside an organization. Sometimes it can be overwhelming too. Like founders can be very aggressive at what they're trying to do, versus sort of when things get founders end up moving into board roles, and then other people become CEOs, or they end up going IPO. That changes a lot of those models and everything too. And I've talked a lot about that in the past. The difference between sort of private equity owned, sort of owned at a public level, still kind of privately owned, but now we've been through 3 cycles or 4 cycles maybe of CEOs and boards and those kind of things, right? Versus sort of those kind of companies that are just being driven by a founder who's got a mission from the beginning. And Daniel's definitely been one of those people. I think this shift in sort of the mission at Greenhouse, one, it probably gives you a bit of an inkling as to how they're thinking about sort of expanding that platform conversation for them, right? Like that idea that making hiring work for everyone is a little bit different from the original sort of mission, which is to make every company great at hiring. Because as he noted, we basically have a lot of AI talking to AI in the current environment, right? Like I get my resume built by AI, I get my keywords done by AI. I might even have an AI do my interview guide for me. And then the flip, I mean, literally one of the briefings you and I just did this 2 weeks ago, I think it was on, is a technology, a really cool new recruiting technology. They were giving me all these things about all the great lists they have and how user-friendly it is. But the one thing that they had that I said, boy, you really need to focus on this and not everything else, is their technology has the ability to detect not only if an AI is being used for the interview, like the video, right, which because it's got an interview component to it, but if the person is reading an AI generated response or script,
right,
for the answer. So it's still a human being, but they're basically saying, ChatGPT, here's the question. How should I answer this, right? It was fascinating because they had sort of figured this out because they were an organization that they were a big consulting firm, and they had been hiring thousands of engineers. And they basically said, through our process, we realized there were these things that were a real issue. And we had to create a technology that could analyze that. They did the same thing with, they have a hacking tool inside of there so that you could do programming. So if you're interested, we will put the note of who that company is in our notes when Cliff puts the notes out. That, but I think it's the same concept here, right? Which is that we know that this space is changing dramatically, and I think Daniel is basically saying we can fix the experience on all levels if we do this right. So I'm waiting to see what that means for a platform discussion, and I'm waiting to see where he takes it. But I love this conversation on founder led and understanding not just that we've got to grow the business or that it's a money conversation, but there is a real mission that is driving that. If we are following the right mission and we are doing things the right way, with fixing the real problem that the business is having, the money in the business generally will follow, right?
Absolutely. So getting back into specific products, this one was pretty interesting. This was another one that was sent to us, kind of a friend of the show, Tony Spangler, now at RepCap. Thank you, Tony. You always send us some pretty interesting stuff. And Business Solver has brought out something that's called anticipatory benefits, which I think they did just to try and get me to stumble over the word anticipatory. Definitely one of those ones. It's tough to say. But basically, what is it? It's powered by their AI, Sophia, which is Business Solver's proprietary AI. And the idea being that to use sort of a predictive analytics model, and look at information from across your business, right? So looking at employee sentiment analysis, user feedback, benefits literacy surveys, and get an idea for, where benefits would best fit. This is one of the, if you work in benefits, this is one of the classic issues, is making sort of recommendations without making recommendations, figuring out who could use it, who goes where, but without, taking that sort of role more than you can just say, here's some suggestions, here's what would work best. And so helping both the employees and the brokers and everyone else kind of go into this rather than being reactive to someone missing benefits that they could have had is the idea here of using AI for this method. Now, of course, this brings up something we talked about in the green room a little bit beforehand and it's going to be a story later on, is that this brings some risk, right? This is sensitive employee data, about the most sensitive there is. So
yeah, and I think there's another story that I think this kind of connects to, although I don't know if we're going to get to it, which is this idea of as you start building on AI, and I don't know the Sophia, and I don't know the background and the model for this, so I'm not saying by any means that this is the case with Business Solver, but we are starting to see particularly free AIs build in paid advertisement conversation, right?
sure.
And this is different than I'm just going to pop up a SEO and on top of it I'm going to have a banner. This is does the generative AI take the paid knowledge into consideration before they take all the other knowledge into consideration, right? So does that always pop up as part of the answer? It's a different dialogue, and in this particular case, not knowing, like giving guidance on what could possibly be the things you might need benefits on is a real big win, because most of the focus has been on making a decision on whatever benefit packages I've already offering. I come up with it, I have to think about it, I have to kind of know, like we know telehealth is one of the fastest growing benefits in our data set. Pet health insurance is one of the fastest growing data sets, right? The other one that we've had a lot of conversations about is mental health. And a lot of people, they've added mental health technology, they've added mental health benefits into their programs, but they're finding people won't access them or utilize them. One, they're a fear of that data being available inside the system. And two, they're not aware of how to utilize it effectively. So there's been a lot of conversation about which benefits do I offer. So if a tool can give you some sense of which ones you should package more that would fit your audience better, real win there, as long as there's because it's getting that information from a set of services being offered, right? As long as sort of there's no marketplace it's pulling from where a certain organization is being highlighted more than another organization, right? Like, I don't think that's the case in this particular at all, but I think that's where we're heading to some of this conversation, right? Which is whenever you have a tool helping you with future possibilities, could it be being guided by someone who paid it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, that could be the case. So, yeah, and of course, then there's your standard just data security risks as well, and privacy and all that other stuff. So, but again, this is definitely something they've addressed. I don't want to make it sound like they haven't done that. We're just, putting it out there because this will come up,
Yeah, no, I love the idea of where Business Solver is going. Don't get me wrong on that. I'm talking about sort of where the future of all of this is going to end up in the conversation, right? And the risks. But I do think that this is the positive side of AI, that it can look at the data and start to say at an individual level, what could we offer that would be of real value to people versus we're just going to do peanut butter and spread a little bit across everybody, right? Which is the compensation model and the benefits model we've had for many, many years. I really like it. Sorry, I didn't mean to sort of...
No, not at all. I'm agreeing with it. Just because we're going to be getting into some of the legal stuff with Eightfold later, I was like, I didn't want to sound as if they didn't have a chance to respond because Eightfold did. But yeah, so let's talk some people news. Speaking of, we talked a couple of friends of the show. Just friend here, Opal Waniak, now is at Darwin Box as their head of market positioning and strategy for Americas. Opal, I don't know if you still listen to the show. I hope you do. But if not, we'll just tell you directly. Congratulations, and you were wonderful.
She does listen. I just talked to her earlier this week. If you listened to last week and you were hearing me and Cliff go, we got a name, we're going to tell you that we didn't. And I don't know, Cliff, if you got a chance to even put your notes out about last week's yet. So
not as at the time of recording. By the time they hear this, yes.
Yes, yeah. We'll have them again. Opal was we were like, oh, we can't say it yet. She didn't have it right. Like it was. She just hadn't made the announcement yet. She hadn't changed up her LinkedIn post. But we're really excited about for Opal because Opal's been in the market for a long time, so that's a good thing, and it's always nice to see people move. Sometimes it feels like, the whole market is changing so often, but the value prop of having people who kind of go in the industry and out of the industry and then back in, and then also are in different organizations is they bring all the lessons learned with them, both the good and the bad, and other organizations can take advantage of that. The original organizations don't lose anything by that perspective, right? I think it makes the market so much more stronger. And Opal's one of those people who I've always found, I got to know her originally through analyst relations at Ultimate, but she came from the product side. In this new role, I think she's going to have a lot of different things underneath her purview. But Darwin Box, I think, is an organization that we do have to mention is we don't get a lot of data from them. We're having some conversations to make sure we can get some more of their customers in our data set. We usually get a couple of write-ins right now. They are growing. Oh, hey, look, I hit my goal, just so y'all know. My watch just let me know that by moving my arm around, I hit my goal of movement. I don't know what that is. But anyways, but Darwin Box, we have seen them growing rapidly in the Asia Pacific market, right? Like that is definitely where they have a stronghold. They're talking about going into the US market. We're seeing a couple of organizations really heading into the US market in that sort of upper mid-market space. And I think that's the interesting thing is a lot of times we see vendors come in and try and go into the SMB space, but we're seeing HiBob's another one that's gonna enter the US market from a payroll perspective. We're already here from an HRMS perspective. Darwin Box is going to enter, I think, at that sort of above 1,000 employee level. And that's a pretty interesting move. It puts some pressure on what we're seeing with the upper solutions like the Workdays, the Oracles, the now UKGs, the SBAs, who are trying to go down market a little bit. It's just going to mean that space gets that much more sort of crowded with opportunities. It's also going to drive the price hopefully down for a lot of the buyers. It will drive some of the value up. We're going to start to see the idea more features and functionalities. Like, are we getting out of it what we want? So I love this kind of competition. And I think, Opal, watch where she goes. She always finds things that I think are important to sort of pay attention to. So
yeah, that actually reminds me that watch where she goes, because I don't remember exactly who was telling you the story. Maybe it was you, but they were mentioning this was at one of Opal's jobs. And they're like, okay, well, when Opal gets here, we'll get started. And someone was like, well, how will we know when Opal gets here? And everyone's just like, you'll know. She commands the presence in the room, like very few others. Just really wonderful. So that's great to hear. And she'll do wonderful things there, I'm sure of it. Speaking of someone who did some really wonderful work, Jim Stratton, CTO at Workday, is leaving, being replaced by Peter Bayless, who will now be the CTO at Workday. Now, you know Jim, right?
I know, yeah, and I know Jim and I know Peter as well. I got a chance to meet Peter a couple of times now at the Workday events because they've done some overlap in their time here. When Jim put out the notice that he's kind of wrapping up his 14 years at Workday, 13 years. CTOs can be formidable. They come in with data and tech and infrastructure and and a lot of times their focus is very much optimizing that technology so that it does the things it needs to do. Customers aren't always their front conversation. They're expecting other people to deal with the customer conversation. They just got to get the infrastructure working many times, right? Jim was one of the few who not only took the time to listen to the customer feedback and conversations that we had from the survey, but he was also really good at translating how the infrastructure impacted the customers, which I think not all CTOs can do very effectively, right? So it's just one of those things where I really got to know Jim really well. I really liked his approach to sort of education and dialogue around it and his willingness to listen. So I'm excited to see where he goes. Like we said, changes everywhere. It is happening. There's no good, no bad to it. It's just the opportunity to see where people end up. I really like Peter as well. I think Peter is, he's really comes from that work that he had done with Google Cloud, where he led the AI for data initiatives and development of generative AI services there. So we're seeing a lot of emphasis there for him on what is the new Workday Illuminate going to look like? How is Sana going to fit into the architecture, the infrastructure? And so I think, he's got his hands full and there's opportunities to do a lot of really cool stuff and the new Workday environment. So, opportunities all the way around for seeing where people land and what opportunities they can do in the market, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've sort of teased it a few times, but we might as well talk about this. This is the Eightfold lawsuit. And originally we were just going to talk about that, right? And things developed and there had been a really good breakdown. Heather Bussing wrote just a fantastic sort of explanatory post, newsletter about it. Yeah. And it's really fantastic. And in fact, I will leave a link to it when this comes out because I think it's worth reading in its entirety. It's educational and just a really good idea here. But, one of the points that she makes is that, so if you don't know, I'm going to do my best to explain it without getting any of us into any legal trouble. But the idea being that if the Eightfold platform is making decisions based on that sort of external data that you mentioned, Stacey, pulling data from a lot of different places. One of those things might be your credit score, right? And the rule is, at least according to the California Consumer Protection Act, that if any of that information is being used, you have the right to know about it. So it's an interesting bit of a punt, because it's rather than saying, look, we're going to pull your credit report, they're saying, no, we're just going to ask this AI, which is maybe going to be pulling your credit report, right? So it's like, well, we don't know. So how this could really play out, though, is that there's a possibility that in the evidentiary gathering place, they're going to have to go to HR practitioners and said, you're using Eightfold. We need to see, what was used. Here's their application. What was the final result of that application, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a possibility then that might kind of make people not want to use Eightfold, or at least just to wait and see.
And I don't think it's just Eightfold. I think it's any of the technology on
yes, that's a great
point. It's doing what we call is data scraping, which is pulling data from and then AI analysis on either that external data set and or your internal data set, and making a judgment call. Those are the kind of the things we're seeing. That was the Workday lawsuit was pulled into that conversation, right? And I think her statement on all of this was basically, it's not hard to fix the concern over this, which is to basically notify people of where the data is being pulled from. And so they can do that, or basically get people's consent to use something that is pulling a generative model out of it, right? And so, and again, if I'm wanting to get hired and I just mark a thing that says, I approve this, that kind of resolves this issue, right? So I think, some of this comes down to just having the right language on your candidate forms and on your candidate tools and your checkboxes and things like that. My take, and I think which is where you were heading with this, is that yes, that is true. It's not a hard thing to fix. That the Workday situation is not a hard thing to sort of address on some level if you kind of open up sort of the underlying algorithms. Because again, originally the process was more of an algorithm than a true AI in that original time frame at which they had that lawsuit set. Now, much like what we saw with the Workday lawsuit, which is their lawsuit said anything current and future AI-driven recruiting could be viewed under this lawsuit, which meant that some of the acquisitions they made played into that role heavily. But the whole concept was they went to their customers. Their customers were called into court, were asked to have their data looked at. And that was the bigger issue for Workday isn't so much that what they were doing was being, they could handle that out of court, in court, handle it through a judgment call. But the minute my customers get involved in having to produce data, that's painful, right? Because particularly if I'm a large global company, I talked a little bit about this, not in particular to them and any vendors they have, but in the whole conversation that I had at HR Tech with J&J's head of assessments. She said, anytime there's a possibility that I might have to produce something and she goes, I produce things for the legal group all the time because we often get requests for, are we covering all the EEOC requirements? Are we handling all those things appropriately? In this sake, it's the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Just anytime you have to go to your customers and they have to open up their records, the amount of agony that creates, right? Yeah. And that is kind of what Eightfold's dealing with. I think their customers are being asked to share their data, right?
And I should also mention that give them some credit because they did respond to Heather's post.
Yeah, I was going to pull that up. And of course, we went through so many things. I was like, man, I can't find my response that they had on it. I think that the biggest response they had there is what I basically saw is, look, we have been very open about our data privacy and our data gathering processes is basically what they said. And then he had a whole blog about that. Heather's response back to that was, does your legal team know you're doing these responses to this on LinkedIn? Which is a very valid response to that, right? I think, anytime you are dealing with the legal side of this, and I will say the market is friendlier right now to employers than to employees in this space. So if you're going to do a lawsuit around this time and I'm a vendor, it's better to have it now than maybe later. But that being said, you've always got to be aware of perception in the market. Perception is reality in a lot of cases. And just, again, if buyers even have an inkling or a whiff that there might be a problem with AI being viewed and they don't have that risk level inside of them to take that risk, you're just going to have a lot less people. That's what I said was the real risk, is that you just have people saying, no, it's not worth it. I could be spending my AI dollars in other places where I can get better outcomes and have less risk. And that's probably what we're going to see in some of this, right?
Absolutely. So this next topic, I think we're going to kind of be talking a little bit about, so brace up. But it stems, interesting enough, from a report, a data report. I mean, we are who we are, right? We're data people, but we're still humans. And this is from an Oliver Wyman report. They've been around a long time. They're extremely good, survey data gathering there, Nielsen, Oliver Wyman, us are the big ones. So this one is called 300,000 Voices and what they tell us about the next era of global change. And this is broad spanning. There's stuff in here about work. There's stuff in here about all sorts of things, talking about just consumer experiences. There was one about 64% of people will dump a brand after a single bad experience, right? It's kind of an interesting thing because it got me thinking a lot about, what you just talked about of, sometimes we have emotional responses to this sort of stuff, like having to deal with the stress of a lawsuit, even if it's not truly going to be a financial risk to us, can affect how we perceive a brand. It's one of the reasons in our survey we ask about, does vendor, in vendor satisfaction, does that matter? We do a separate score because that's totally different than is the product work. And that could be the brand perception of what's out there. And one of the things also, there was also one about AI. There's a lot of data in there. I highly recommend it. We'll put it in because it's a very large report. One about their headline was, "We are living at the bottom of AI's productivity J-curve," which is that less than 5% of organizations reported meaningful ROI from AI in 2025. Yet 97% of organizations viewing AI as strategic lever. But the one that stood out was quite a bit, it seemed very prescient because it's about generational responses to this question. Is it important that your employer engages with key social issues? And the only generation where less than half of them thought it was important was baby boomers, and only 39%. 61% of Gen Xers felt it was important that employers engage with key social issues, 80% of millennials, and 83% of Gen Z. So this is something where it's an overwhelming amount of people really feel that it's important that companies take a stand on this sort of stuff. And I'd say we're right on that cusp. Stacey and I are both Gen Xers. And sometimes, especially in the world we're at, it can be difficult, and I don't know. It's tough when things are going on that seem like outside of the business world, and you don't want to alienate potential customers or all this other stuff. But there's also, we're humans, right? And the stuff we saw in Minnesota in the last few weeks is just, I know it's not really brave of me to say I take a stand against a murder, but this is the sort of world we're in. And so, yeah, it's tough to watch, and it affects us just as much as it probably affects any of you. It'd feel weird not to address it. I know it kind of feels strange on the HR Tech podcast to talk about it, but I think it would seem even weirder to not mention it. And so as bold as it is, yeah, I'm against murder. I don't know if other people feel the same way, but not to make too much light of it. But, there's a lot of bravery going on out there in the people, and stand with you.
Yeah. And I know Cliff and I talked about, do we open the conversation this week with that versus do we sort of cover it here where we're talking about it from a data perspective? And I know I went round and round with my own sort of conscience about posting some stuff on LinkedIn versus sort of posting on personal on Facebook, where I do a lot of posting on Facebook about sort of things that are important to me on a personal level. I do think that it isn't so much even about like, I take a stance or I take but per se, for at least for me on these conversations, it's there's data and there's facts, and I really work hard to make sure that I understand the data and the facts behind things, and sometimes it's so hard to know that some of that stuff gets tweaked or shifted around, right? And I have a hard time sort of letting that just lie when you see something that it counters what you know from what you not only have seen, but also what you have read and the kind of research you've done, right? So taking this as a really good example, we started our business at Sapient Insights Group in 2020. And the week we launched Sapient Insights, which was came out of Steelbridge, which was run by Susan Richards, and we combined the entities together and created a new partnership. That week was the week of the George Floyd murder, right? And I remember we kind of held back announcing and having that conversation about us doing something that was exciting and what was really important to us, because there was just so much pain in the country at the time, right? And it feels like we're now 5 years on, and some of that we're almost getting numb to some of that conversation. And that's I think a harder part to even be aware of, right? Is that we've sort of stopped and we're not, because people just don't even want to listen to the news anymore. They're not paying attention to what's happening on some sense, right? So I know that's happening, right? I thought it was really interesting, this data point that you had pulled up as we had started talking about it. This mirrors in 2023, the end of 2022 and then into 2023, we had done a survey of employees. It was a pretty good survey. We had done an anonymous one. We were actually at that point in time trying to get an understanding of how the market was feeling about not just social issues, because that was the start of what we have seen a lot of over the last year, which has been the shift away from DEI work, right? We knew some of the changes were happening. We were wanting to get an understanding of the sentiment. Did people really make decisions off of social? Would they rather you not bring it up at work? Along with some other stances around how people are making decisions about hiring. It was a really good survey. We put out a couple of pieces about it. It was funded with some colleagues of ours, that Kick Motor, Mark Mosqueda, and stuff. What was interesting was this particular data point was almost exactly on what it just says here now as well. So again, validation of what we're seeing is that at that point in time, baby boomers, Gen X were less likely to be interested in sort of their company being involved or even mentioning social issues, and Gen Z were much more likely. And we asked the question, and would it change your decision to take a job, and then would it change your decision to maybe leave a job? And do you feel comfortable having a voice on any level, right? And there was very much Gen Zs felt they weren't as comfortable having a voice. They didn't feel like they always had a voice in those conversations. They were much less likely to leave the job. So they wouldn't leave the job based on a social stance in the organization, but they would take a job, like decide to either take or not take a job based on the social stance that the organization, which I think is very aligned with what we see here in this data. The other thing I think that we can't forget when we're having these conversations is there's the social conversation, there's the sort of just the change that's happening in countries or in sort of people's perception of data and facts, those kind of things. But there's also a reality check that the industry we're in, HR, plays an outside role in how things happen, because work is 80-90% of most people's lives, and as much as we don't want it to be, right? When you think about the actions taken just over this last weekend and the impact that is being had in our country around federal agents who have been hired, there is a leadership culture that's been set, but in that leadership culture conversation, there is also a series of policies. There are hiring and recruiting policies. There are decisions about training. There are decisions about incentives that are being given. And every time you sort of think about how things come about, how do they happen inside of both organizations and in our cultures, we have to go back to that, you might say, well, that's just words. That's just, something that's been said. In the early 1970s, I always remind people that we had a lot of airplanes that crashed, a lot of them, right? There was not as much safety and security inside of airplanes as there had been previously. And one of the changes that industry made, which I thought was really interesting to sort of see the dynamics of, is they stopped calling clients and customers, and they started calling them souls. And the reason they made that change, when you talk to any airline pilots or anybody about that, they say we have 220 souls on board. When they talk about it, even over to their colleagues, when they're talking about it in the language they use in training, when they talk about it in the language they're using to the airline regulatory stance. And the reason they made that change was they felt there was a need to make sure everybody who worked on a plane, everybody who had something to do with a plane, everyone had something to do with air traffic control, understood that they were talking about human beings, right? And I took a look at some of the language that we see in some of the directives that are coming out of our federal government right now, and we are seeing language that looks like prospects, or you're seeing language
dehumanization.
Yeah, the dehumanization of that language, right? That makes an impact on how then people will treat other people in this situation. The other thing is the incentives we're seeing, right? The $50,000 bonuses, the $30,000 bonuses for decisions, 3,000 a month. And one of the things that we know, that we're seeing in those data stats is that if you have an incentive to just get a number and not to get a quality number, we know this in recruiting, we know this in all kinds of spaces, in qualifying leads and right, like that drives a certain way and approach that people act inside of an organization. One of the changes that took place in our world here in the United States around how factories handled exits and safety and just the ability for people to sort of have enough room and space and fire was the shirtwaist factory fire that happened in the 1800s, right? That seeing almost, I think it was, I don't know the exact number. I didn't pull that up as a stat or thing, but I mean, like it was 200 women who died in a fire because they didn't have fire exits and they didn't have emergency ways.
They literally had the doors locked.
Yeah, they literally had the doors locked, right? That kind of thing, those kind of regulations come about because, again, humans aren't, in general, they're not thinking that something horrendous is going to happen, but it does happen if you're not paying attention to the things that you are incentivizing, which in that case was, I need as many people to work as quickly as possible. I think the reason those doors were locked was because people were getting out and smoking or something in the afternoons. There was something like that. That was the case, right? They were leaving when they didn't want them to leave. We have the same situation, which is this idea that incentives drive outcomes. Same thing with training. I can't emphasize enough about how important training is to reaction time, to how you react to things, to de-escalation of situations. And the fact that we know that in this particular case, these federal agents have moved from 5 months of training, which was required for every agent prior to the current situation, now down to 42 days of training. And if you just think about any safety environment, any company have what they would be held accountable to if they shifted training from 5 months to 42 days, and then you had a death on that job, right? Any other company would be sued in that environment, right? If they were a corporation or a company. So I know this is a heavy topic. I know this is a topic where we all have differing views, but I do think that we as HR professionals have to think about every time we're asked to put in place a compensation decision, a hiring decision, a incentive decision, a training decision. And every time our company is making risky decisions because a leader has an outcome they're trying to achieve that may not mirror does not understand the impact. And I'm not saying that the leader always, sometimes they do understand the impact of what they're asking for. Oftentimes they do. It is a part of HR's responsibility to voice openly the risks we are taking with not only the workforce, but to the brand and to the perception and to the things that are going on inside of our organization. And highlighting things like the language we use and how that might impact dehumanizing people versus saving people's lives. That is a really big ask of any HR professional. I get that completely, but I think that is a big part of our role inside of these organizations. I think that's a big part of what makes us important inside of an organization, outside of all the other things that we talk about from business outcome perspective. So very heavy conversation.
Yeah.
I know you and I talked. You and I were like, how do we talk about this? And you're like, well, we're not going to talk about it in the green room. You made me do this.
Yeah, I did.
So
there we go.
Hard.
Well, it's a raw emotions, and yes, yeah. Abolish ICE. So speaking of leadership, we've got one about CEOs, leadership AI. Sorry for the 180, but yeah, I think what you said was really well said. I think we can, hopefully, I'm giving all my hope there that we don't have to keep having this conversation because we've taken positive steps. But yeah, so this one is pretty about interesting. I think we're probably getting into the speed round section here, but these are still very interesting stories. And this one was about how, this is a stat from Boston Consulting Group, BCG, yep, that nearly 3/4 of CEOs say that they're their main decision maker on AI. And that's kind of interesting because we've already talked on previous episodes about how we're seeing more usage of AI at the executive levels. And, that basically the higher you go up, the more positive you feel about AI and the more usage you're seeing in AI. So if those are the decision makers about the use of AI, there may be a bit of a blind spot because they'll say, well, it seems to be very useful and I'm using it a lot, so pretty interesting. Although what was pretty impressive was that 50% of CEOs believe that their job is on the line if AI does not pay off. So that's kind of interesting as well, of feeling some sort of responsibility, as you were just saying, in leadership for that sort of stuff.
And I think it's a reality. I do think that there is. I think that's why we're seeing some of this really not just risky, but also sort of harsh approach in some cases to sort of how AI is going to be used inside organizations and how much we expect it to sort of reduce cost. Is that, and we're 2 years into this almost now with the what I would say is a hype cycle for generative AI. And boards are starting to say, I want to see the outcome. That was a conversation I think we had last time with what we're seeing on some of the layoffs, right? Is that boards it isn't they know that they haven't seen the optimization. They know that the efficiencies have not come as much as they would. They know but they are saying you need to pay for this in some way. So you have to make those hard calls. And the boards are expecting it. And so it's going to be, I think we're going to see more of that until people start to sort of balance out and realize that what we're seeing more so often that really works inside of AI is it's oftentimes a plus add value versus a reduce and efficiency conversation. That the real wins are in the, now I'm not letting people go. I'm actually letting people do things that we couldn't do previously because we just didn't have the time. Right.
Yeah. This next one's interesting because it's sort of a follow-up. It's interesting because the first time we brought up MCP servers, the Model Context Protocol, the analogy that was used is that it was the USB-C for AI connectors. But this one was pretty interesting because they use the ODBC, which is the Open Database Connectivity, which was used for databases in the 90s, basically just taking this big mess of all the different languages, all the different ways these things had to speak to each other, and going, rather than every single thing having their own connection, to one sort of central repository that evens it out and then sends it back out. So pretty interesting. People are definitely finding a lot of value in this. Specifically, I think this was Vizier's MCP that people are really looking at. So, we were talking about AI and the uses of, and one of the challenges is going to be all these different types of agents and all the different ways that we use AI and all the different companies, platforms, programs that use it. How do we get them all to talk to each other within the company? So pretty fascinating. We also got, if you had anything there, we also had some interesting ideas from Davos.
Yeah, the Davos meetings, I think. I've been watching sort of we know of a lot of organizations who are in the HR tech space who are there, many of them who are people who are in our research or customers of ours. And what I really thought was sort of interesting is the stories coming out of the Davos, right, this year is that, yes, there's been a lot of sort of back and forth about sort of the US's role and what that looks like, but there was also a lot of focus on AI and the role of AI in the next market and the next evolution of that market. And what I think we heard really, really loud and really clearly is that there is an understanding that a lot of the AI outcomes and a lot of the AI opportunities right now still sit within the US market. Within that conversation, particularly for tech firms, there is a big conversation about doing looking at it not as this idea that's going to replace, but that it is going to add value to the work and the workloads and the work environments that we had. And I saw that. It was really nice. We saw that Cornerstone was there. Their CEO, Himanshu, had a really nice quote and statement on this conversation. Ashna, who's the general manager, one of my favorite people over at Workday, she did a panel as well that I got a chance to watch. And it was really good to hear her talk about the power of AI as it relates to individually treating employees as an individual, right? And that's a unique thing that I think we can really take an opportunity in. So I do think we saw many of our people who have been working heavily in the HR tech space represented at the Davos. There were many, many others, but those were the two that I caught specifically, their panels. And what I really liked is that in both cases, the conversations, Himanshu's was very much a conversation about not just what AI will do for us as a market, but also what AI will do for the individuals themselves, right? Like the opportunities it's going to bring to them. And then, Asha kind of had that different perspective, which is we can start to really think about our workforce at a much more granular level, which gives more opportunity for everybody. So it's kind of the same concepts coming out. And I just really like the fact that we are looking at this through the lens of possibilities. And I think that was a lot of what we saw come out of the Davos environment. I don't know if you saw anything else different, Cliff.
No, your point about the AI sort of concentration, almost a bit of a monopoly between West Coast United States firms. But we've seen a lot of Chinese resurgence in this area. And because of, I would say, the economic instability of many of the U.S. firms that are relying on basically endless supplies of capital in the form of loans, means it's very precarious. And when it falls, it'll probably be on China, because there are some uses, probably not consumer-facing AI, your chat GPTs. But where is that going to come from? From the sort of products that we see, when it's using predictive models to determine, who could use it. That still will have a use case. It just, we might not see that in your chat GPTs. In fact, Anthropic put out a study that they did last year as well, the Anthropic Economic Index Report. They're the ones that make Claude, Anthropic is. And it was pretty interesting. It was a lot of where they're seeing success rates, more complex tasks show greater time savings is one of their things, but also have like higher failure rates, basically. Like, yeah, you can save a lot of time doing these complex tasks, but there's more likely to have errors within them. So, and they make the point that even with those errors and even fixing those, you still get time savings. And the recommendation being, you should be iterating along the way rather than in trying to get a full output from, what would have been like a 6-hour task. But they even touch on the fact that the amount of use in higher education could point towards a long-term de-skilling, and we're already seeing some other problems with AI. So it's kind of interesting to see that coming directly from Anthropic themselves. It's another long report that I recommend people go into, because they do go into some stats across that. And it's also kind of funny.
And I think this was posted by Amy and Meg, two of our good friends, who will quote here in the notes when we position this. And I think this conversation about de-skilling is what hit everybody. It was like, what do you mean de-skilling? I haven't made my commentary to that post. I will, if I get some time this week, try to, but I see it differently a little bit. Not so much de-skilling, because I do understand this idea that the idea of de-skilling came from the idea that what AI is actually doing is it is doing the hardest work, like the stuff that you need 14 years of knowledge to do versus the stuff you need 12 years of knowledge. And the idea is that, we're going to have a lot of people, because it isn't helping junior workers as much. That we pretty much know. We know that it's helping the subject matter experts most, but it is taking that work that would take 14 years for an SME to learn versus the years that would take 12 years. And so they're starting to see that concept is, I just look at it differently, because I think, it's kind of like back to the days of the calculator. Like, it would take me twice as long to learn how to do an equation, right, versus understanding what went into that equation. And then now, because the calculator can do that equation, I can really focus on what that data means that it's produced. I see it a little bit in the sense that if the AI can take over some of the more difficult, sort of heavy lifting, right, work, if we do it right, then what's remaining could be not maybe the hardest, but the most valuable. And I think that's the conversation we have to have, is what is really valuable work that the humans do. One of the really good examples, I want to say it's Cello, but I'm not sure if it is, Cielo who had said that they had shifted their whole recruiting process so that at the front of the funnel is the recruiter talking to someone. And then at the back end, they do a lot of other stuff to optimize the process. But that most important thing, which is that recruiter gets to have that conversation. And even if that person doesn't make it any farther down the funnel, they've had that conversation. That human interact becomes the most important conversation. Most people would say that's what we're getting rid of the interviews. We're going to have AI do the interviews. And they're like, yeah, no, that is not what we're using this for. I just think that's really what we have to think about. What is the most powerful human component to anything that we're doing?
I love that. Yeah. That's really great. And since we're on the AI topic, one last one. Yeah. Paid advertising and chat GPT. So this could change things, right? This was just about a week ago that OpenAI made this official, I guess, that they will start throwing some ads in here. And this leads us back to kind of what you were talking about before when we were talking about benefits. You mentioned that we may talk about that, which is what is the data being pulled and, who has the rights to show stuff to you. I think any of us that have been on the internet for any length of time have watched this sort of devolve from the almost like fun days of, remember, we'd get these stories of, wow, this thing knows me better than anyone, or it's being able to predict which people are pregnant. If you remember that story, that Target could tell you if you're pregnant from their ads, to now it's like, it's just like, okay, I've got to scroll like 2 pages to get past these ads. I'm not even going to look at them because I know they're going to be the worst possible pick that I can see.
Yeah, and I think that this is my take on this, and Brett Starr, who's a good friend, who used to run Starr Conspiracy, and I know our other friend Tony, who moved on from there. Part of the reason I think Brett Starr was moving in a new direction, a little bit away from HR in general, is he was really focusing on this idea of how do we prep companies for getting their information and data into ChatGPT and the AI generative tools versus what is the traditional search engine optimization. And so I don't know, people are calling this AI optimization or AI engine, depends on sort of which tools you're looking at. And I think in his take on this, and of course he was pitching something that he's kind of selling to the companies, but I did think he did a really good job explaining it in general, is that you can't treat this like search engine optimization, that there's a difference between sort of just buying an ad that's going to show up at the top of a list, right? Versus people are leveraging ChatGPT to give them whole concepts, whole articles, whole ideas. So in that case, you have to make sure that the content that you have is valuable to that conversation and answers a question that the person has. And if your content isn't set up that way. Now, one of the things I noted is that we have gotten quite a bit of influx of people calling us from our name being listed as one of the top people in the HR technology space to talk to if you have a question, which is our SEO, to be honest, on our website is not great. We haven't been really good at like make sure our stuff ends up at the top of the SEO page, because that's a lot of money and a lot of work, and we're a research firm, we're not an ad campaign company, right? But with research, our data and our information is out in the market and it answers questions, and so it makes it, we actually kind of are already in that model on some level, and then he's helping organizations figure out how to get to that model. The idea that right now, we've had this conversation already that once you give AI a task, it oftentimes will stay on that task, even if you tell it not to go to that task, right? And so the idea that it has its own ability to make its own decisions on some level, we know that it doesn't always come up with the same answer twice. Well, if I've paid for something to be somewhere, and it doesn't automatically say that I am the right answer for whatever you're putting out there, or that I'm not somehow related to that answer when it gets questioned, at what point do the programmers within that AI tool say, I need to now give you a rule that you have to follow, instead of you are just kind of using your own internal AI awareness to make decisions? And again, we're talking very humanistic concepts there, but that is the real thing here, right? Like, this is not just the difference between I show ads or I don't show ads. This is, how do I encourage a system that is thinking for itself to somehow say this is an important thing to put at the top of that conversation? That's really what it comes down to, right?
Absolutely. And then finally, we got this one just like a couple hours before we even started recording. This is from UKG, our friends there. They've got their own data that they've pulled, probably the most important survey, besides ours, of course, of the year, which is what are U.S. employees doing about the Super Bowl? It's been a very global conversation, but to American football, we got some cool data. One that was very interesting that I found. So basically, all the numbers have gone up from the usual sort of Super Bowl productivity headache hangover, where we're seeing 13.1 million employees plan to take a paid time off. That's up. 6.5 million plan to swap shifts. That's up quite a bit, in fact. 3.3 million plan to call out sick despite not being sick. That's slightly up. But an interesting one that wasn't up and that wasn't even highlighted, in fact, which is 1.6 million plan to do a no-call, no-show, or just ghost work, right? The term ghosting. But that was 3.2 million last year, meaning just half as many. So basically, people are planning ahead, using the tools ahead of them as were intended to not show up for work after the big football game, which, of course, the Patriots will win. at least in Boston. So it's required.
I'm not even going to get into that conversation with you there, Cliff. Neither of my teams are in that fight, so I will.
Yeah, I will be at work. World Cup final, maybe, but certainly Super Bowl. I can do both.
I'm always wanting to see the ads on the Super Bowl, but
yes.
with such heavy topics that we talked about today.
Yeah, and the Puppy Bowl. The Puppy Bowl is amazing. Shouts out to that.
Yeah, this data is probably the data that adds the most smile to everybody's face today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a lot about the U.S., talked a lot about global. Where can they find us? Let's get through this. Quite a few places, yeah?
Yeah. Events we're going to be at. So just so everybody is aware, both you and I will be on March 9th through the 11th. We're going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona at an Eightfold event.
We'll be, and then, that's right. Then actually, I go. Someone will be possibly in Philadelphia for Phenoms event. We're still working that out. March 16th to the 20th. Wow, we're all over the place, huh?
Yeah.
Tammy Smith from our group will be at the Qualtrics event in Seattle. Mm-hmm. Then Allison and Summer will be at Unleash America at the same dates, March 16th to 20th in Las Vegas. And at the very tail end of that, Stacey, you'll be at the 321 Coffee Conference Day. You did that last year as well, right?
We did, yeah. That's we're actually sponsoring that. That's going to be here in Raleigh, North Carolina. 321 Coffee is a wonderful organization that we sponsor every year. We'll be there representing and making sure we're supporting the group. Yeah. And then you and I, I definitely will be, and we're still trying to decide if you'll be able to attend on March 23rd and 25th. The following week, we're going to be at Transform in Las Vegas. That's the first time I'll be attending that event. We'll be doing a lunch and learn there session, and we're excited about that. And Cliff, you may come. We're trying to figure out if that makes, if we have the ability to stretch that one as well. But Las Vegas, we get a lot of them this time of year, right?
Yeah, we do. Although April 13th to the 16th will be in Atlanta, and that will be you, Stacey. You'll be there at
Info's analyst event, yes, yeah. And then we're possibly going to be April 13th, 15th. At the same time, you're going to possibly be at the ADP's executive forum.
Down the road in Orlando?
Yeah.
That's right. And then this will be exciting. There's some new companies and some new names, and we'll get to that at the end there. But right after that, April 15th and 16th, Canva will be having an event, and I'll be there, and possibly Caitlin from our team as well in LA, Los Angeles, California, followed by April 20th to the 24th. Speaking of global events, you'll be at HR Tech Europe, or Stacey, you will be there with Summer.
I'll be there with Summer this year. Yeah. So Summer's going to come help support some of the work that we're doing. We have 3 sessions actually at HR Tech. We're doing a mentoring and coaching at the beginning and the end of the session on how to start your HR technology journey. So really excited about that. And then we will be doing a release of our international annual HR systems survey data. So that'll be fun because we haven't had a chance to get that out to the market yet. So very excited about doing that and seeing everybody in Amsterdam. Yep.
Yeah, in Holland and the Netherlands. And then April 21st to the 24th, finally, I'll be at Workday. So that, I think, is TBD.
Location is out in California. We know that. Yeah.
Exciting. Well, that was a roller coaster of both the topics and emotions.
It was, I know, and you almost had me crying. I know you were there.
Don't watch the video on this one. We're on YouTube. Don't see that. I was just so dusty. I've been out of town.
Yeah. All right, guys. I know you've been listening for a full hour. If you are still hanging with us, we are just appreciative. It's been a long night. Cliff and I we were like, oh my God, there's so much to cover. But important topics and things that I think we all need to know that we're all thinking about and that we're all kind of in this together. Our hearts, our thoughts go out to all of our friends in the Minnesota, Minneapolis area, and we're here for you if you need us. Those kind of things are important to just stand with each other. All right. As we wrap today, I want to say a couple of big issues. As I said, the big full report is available. The survey white paper. It's not the white paper. I got to take that language out of here, Cliff. It is now the research paper. My team is very much
the report.
No longer is it is too big to begin to be called a white paper. Is basically what we realized about a year and a half ago. It is a full-on research report. I got to keep calling it a research report. I think it's the language I got in my script here. And I just want to say it's available in our research marketplace. If you have any questions, please let us know. Also, be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. And if you'd like to support any of these things, please note, like, and make comments on the podcast at our work-defined environment and at any of the other platforms you might access it. Stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content. You can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn and Instagram. And Cliff, thank you as always for pulling all this together, for forcing me to have the tough conversations that sometimes are really difficult. We know we need to do them. A big thank you to our production team, including Brain Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by their amazing founder, Kelly Kelly. Our marketing team, Summer Rolano, Cole Harris, Linda Galloway, Caitlin Diamond. We have a few other people that will be adding to that list hopefully soon. And thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. That's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights. Bye, everyone.